I wanted to tell you about my experience last summer. I'm fortunate enough to have a larger house and a little bit of land to go with it, so I'm kind of an outdoor freak. Having a very successful career has allowed me to have multiple trailers and a work truck as necessary. In one of the trailers, I keep my 2 dogs, a Rottweiler German Shepherd mix named Yogi, and my other dog, Ralph, who's an Irish Wolfhound. 2 total sweethearts. I have a really nice area set up for them and plenty of food and water. They really enjoyed it in there. They usually just spend a lot of time sleeping and lounging around, but I only keep them in there when I'm gone. Whatever happened that night, whatever thing came, I believe killed my dogs and took them. This evening I was taking my woman out to dinner and a movie, and we ended up going out to the bar for a couple of beers afterward. We came back to the house really late. It was well after midnight since we left the bar around 10. As I'm pulling up the street to get to my house, I look to see some distorted, torn metal on the top of one of my trailers. What the? My girlfriend actually pointed it out first and immediately said that somebody had broken in. I pulled my truck over immediately and ran up my driveway. It was worse than I thought. There were pieces and chunks of torn up metal with blood on them lying on the ground. It looked like metal pieces of a car that would fly off in the head-to-head collision. Mangled, bent, and destroyed. I was near on having a panic attack when I realized I didn't hear my dogs. I quickly unlocked the door and flung it open, and my heart stopped in my stomach. My dogs were nowhere to be found, but there was blood and fur everywhere on the floor, along with more pieces of bloody, shredded up metal. It reeked like wet dog, blood, and death. I look up and there's a gaping hole in my ceiling, easily large enough for Andre the Giant to fit through. It was a mess. I had a mental breakdown. My girlfriend was freaking the hell out, crying hysterically. So I called the police and told them that there was a break-in, and my dogs went missing. I was panicking so hard on the phone with the 911 operator, she could hardly understand me. A cop came pretty quickly, and I showed him what happened in my trailer, and told him I had no idea what happened. I just don't understand why there's no signs of my dogs anywhere. Just tufts of their fur and blood. I didn't even know if it was their blood. What the hell kind of animal is strong enough to tear into a trailer, grab 2 large dogs, kill them, and eat them, and then leave? If that is what happened, I didn't know. I'll never forget the look on his face when he took in the scenery inside the trailer. He went pale and started acting really nervous. He was stuttering and being really fidgety and told me he needed to step away real quick and make a quick phone call. He was on the phone for about 10 minutes when he comes back to tell me he's going to take some information down, but it was probably just a bear who broke in and was hungry. I flipped out on him, telling him what kind of bear rips through the top part of a metal trailer and devours 2 large-sized dogs. He never gave me a direct answer, just ended things with, "I'm just going to write this down as a bear attack and you need to be careful next time." Bullshit. I never heard anything else from the police department. His tone and demeanor scared me when he was taking down notes. It's like he knew something, and he kept telling me it was just a bear and that I shouldn't worry. Although he and I both seemed to clearly understand it was impossible for a bear to have done this magnitude of damage. I didn't get any sleep that night, or for the next few. I had just got rid of the trailer within a week and had it scrapped. I did put up flyers though, hoping somewhere my dogs would show up, but they never did. It was pretty traumatizing what happened to me. I'll never forget it. What I still don't understand is, with that kind of carnage, the police should have done more. I don't know what to think. It was a long time ago, but I'm pretty sure I and my dad found a dead juvenile Dogman in our barn. It was in the wintertime, and we had 2 barns on our property. One which my father would use, and another one on the far side of the property that was a little more out of shape. It desperately needed a new paint job and a lot of other things done to it. My father really never got around to it, so He just used it as storage and infrequently visited it. Our property was shaped more like a big rectangle. We had thick timber and fir all around our property line, except for the front, which sloped down to a dirt road that rounded around our house, followed by more clear land. The barn that acted as a large storage shed was a few hundred yards away from the house, near the woodline, kind of tucked away in the corner of the property. The other barn, our shed, chicken coop, was all on the other side of the property. This left us with really no reason to go out that way, unless my dad needed some specific things from the other barn. Sorry, I have to lay out the details for you first. So, this was in the wintertime, and I was helping my dad out in the storage barn, and he was clearing a bunch of old hay, because he was going to set one of his cars in there. It had been a brutally cold winter. Lots of snow and lots of ice. As we're clearing out the hay, we end up finding this thing. I don't know what you would call it. A dogman, I guess. It must have tried to find warmth in the old hay, and froze to death, I'm guessing. I'm not really sure how it died. That's just based on what I know now. As a kid, it really freaked me out. My dad just thought it was some strange animal, but it looked freaky. This thing looked to be the size of a child, but slightly larger than I. I was 8 years old at the time, and it was very humanoid looking. It was curled up in the fetal position. It had black leathery skin, and black matted fur all over its back. It had human-like hands with long black claws on the ends of each finger. The feet were dog-like, and the legs had hocks in them, just like a dog did. It had a wolf-looking face that looked like it was in anguish when it died. Its muzzle was the scariest thing about it at the time. It had long rows of razor-bladed teeth that kind of curled backward a little bit. They were sharp. Its eyes had already rotted out, and it was much frailer than I would have expected. If this thing truly matches with any of the living descriptions of a creature of similar features, I would imagine it to be quite muscular. It wasn't uncommon for us to find dead animals like that in our barn that would either eat poison or freeze from the winter, but I had no idea what we were looking at. I kept asking my father what it was, and he just kept telling me to bury it. It will always stick with me for as long as I can remember. "10 years ago, I worked as a security guard to a rather popular apple orchard in the state of Massachusetts. I won't name the name of the orchard, but it is a very popular one. I ended up quitting my security job because of this incident. I had already been there for a few months when this happened, so I was doing my nightly routine. I was patrolling the west area of the orchard when I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I kept seeing this large shape dart between the trees in the orchard. I thought somebody was trying to sneak around, so I quickly investigated and shone my light into the orchard. I didn't see anything at first, but then I thought I saw a shape that didn't look like it was supposed to be there. I started walking closer, saying out loud, 'I'm coming to you. I know you're there.' I take about another 2 to 3 steps, and this huge canine-like shape takes off bolting through the orchard. It was so loud, it sounded like 10 gorillas crashing through the woods, destroying several of the apple trees in the process. It all happened so fast that I wasn't able to get a great look at it, other than I knew I wanted to be as far away from that thing as possible. I was telling my boss about it, and even he thought I was just making it up. It scared the hell out of me. I think mainly because it was so huge, just such a massive shape. Whatever it was had to have been easily 500 plus pounds, and looked like it was crouching down. As it took off, I did get a decent view of the back, and could see what looked like cropped ears on top of his head, and a little bit of a side profile on the muzzle. I work for a county cleanup crew in Mississippi. I won't say which county because my name is known around here, and I don't want to receive any flack for telling you guys this. I do many different things for the county, but I've gone on the cleanup crew a few times. Let me explain to you what I mean by the cleanup crew. I'll go through some of the more rural highways and areas with a lot of critter traffic and clean up roadkill. Whole lot more to say than that. One day, I was doing my route by myself. It was a long highway that really goes out there in the country. This area is notorious for roadkill, such as squirrels and skunks. Deer a lot of times too, but not as much. We get a lot of other critters like possums and raccoons, but they're all amongst the bunch. In my time doing this, I've come across several carcasses of deer that are torn to pieces. I don't mean just ripped open and eaten. I'm talking literally ripped open and guts torn out and thrown everywhere. It's a mess. The only meat that is being eaten is by the flies and maggots. What I think happens is that some of these deer get hit by trucks and get knocked onto the side of the road, and then perhaps some large bear or other predator comes and does this to the deer. Only problem is, what kind of predator doesn't eat the meat, but instead rips up the carcass? Well, I would find that out in just a few months. I was driving home and it was in the evening time, so it was already dark. I actually lived not too far away from some of the highways I'm assigned to clean up. Upon coming up a rather large hill was a dead deer in the other lane of the road, as well as this monstrous wolf-looking person or thing, and it was crouched down, just like a person would. It was ripping the meat off the bone. I came upon the hill, saw the scene in front of me, but didn't slow down or speed up. I just kept driving, and I took it in all at once. Whatever this animal was never looked up at me or cared to notice me, but in the 3 seconds I saw everything that I did, it was ripping the skin off the carcass, and had what appeared to be blood all over its hands and chest. I didn't really see the face, but it looked very coyote-like. It was gray-looking and slender. It wasn't huge, but it looked to be about as big as me and you. I have never quite heard of an animal like this, but I dismissed it and kept driving. It wasn't until later on that I pieced it together once I found another deer carcass that looks like the same thing, and wondered if it was from this animal. I had begun asking around my area if anybody had seen a creature like the one I saw, and, of course, I was either laughed at or told I was crazy. That's when I knew I was onto something. Whatever I saw didn't scare me, but it did intrigue me, because I didn't know those kinds of things can exist. It certainly seems like it would possess incredible killing power. I was curious. I really wanted to do some heavy research and dig up what I could. Unfortunately, not a lot turned up, but then I stumbled upon the keyword Dogman and started reading encounter after encounter and stories. I've heard everything from the bodybuilder, pitch black looking dogman, to the more hyena looking dogmen, to even the coyote skinny kind of dogmen. The whole phenomenon is really interesting, and I'm not sure if these creatures are regional or what the deal is, but now it does make sense, and I do believe I saw one of these things. Before I tell you the story, I would like to give you a little background information on me and the situation. I'm 39, and I have a wife, Taylor, who is 32. We have been married for almost 10 years now, and I have grown extremely close with her family. Particularly, her grandmother, Verla, who just passed away last year. Her grandmother was a very interesting character, had a very successful business, and plentiful amounts of wealth. She was quite the businesswoman from what I heard from her colleagues. Anyway, she owned a very large house that was plantation-styled in northern Kentucky. This huge plot of land featured acres and acres, as well as a barn and other stuff on the property. I mean, this is a huge house we're talking about. Maybe close to a mansion size, I don't know. We've known about it, but we've never actually been out there ourselves till this last year to see the house. We live in Northern California, and she would always come and visit us, so we never really had a reason to go out there. She was very close with my wife, and I as well. And, of course, from her passing, it was extremely difficult for both of us. She did leave a will, and it turns out that she actually left the house and her property to my wife in the will. We were astonished that she would do this, but she did leave huge sums of money for some of my wife's brothers and sisters. We flew out to Kentucky to check the place out since it was now in my wife's name. I know she was really wishy-washy about it, but I'm not sure she wanted to really go through with it. I thought about selling it, but she also thought about keeping it, and us moving into it. It all depended on what the property looked like and how much work was going to be needed. Knowing Verla, she had the place pretty spot on and kept up on things really great. She didn't have any grandkids or anything like that, so the house stayed pretty immaculate. She was always kind of a clean freak though, even when she would come over. So, we get to northern Kentucky, and we go to check out this house. She lived pretty secluded. You had to take this long 2-lane road, and then onto this long dirt gravel road that would eventually lead you to her property. Her property itself was beautiful, with what I can only describe as big rolling pastures that went on and on, with the Kentucky wilderness all around. It was utterly breathtaking. She even had an older well on the property. The house itself was massive and had 5 or so bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, and a couple of additional bedrooms used for stuff, I guess. An attic and a basement were also included, and other various rooms that weren't being used or used to store only items. Again, there was a lot of rooms. It was a beautiful older home, and had a nice big wood stove in the kitchen that was used primarily for heating and cooking. I had big ideas in my head already to flip this thing and make a killing, since I had no desire to want to live in it. From we could tell right away that the house was in fairly good shape. My wife was very impressed with the house, but came to the same conclusion that maybe we should try and sell it versus abandoning our jobs back at home. We sat outside on the massive wraparound porch, talking about our plans and what we wanted to do. This was in the evening time, and at some point during our conversation, we began to hear strange vocalizations off in the woods next to us. My wife and I would exchange glances every time we heard these. They began to get more and more disturbing and strange. I'm no wildlife expert, but I'm pretty sure I've never heard an animal noise quite like this. It was like a guttural howl. It sounded so low, and whatever made the sound had to have quite the set of lungs. Then we would hear this really low growling sound. It was all around the woods around us. It made us uncomfortable, but it wasn't too out of control. The noise had stopped after a while, and we quickly forgot about it. We decided to do one more walk around the house, just to get a better feel for things on the outside. It was really starting to get dusk, so we weren't planning on staying too much longer. My wife began to notice weird things around the sides of the house. Huge tracks going back and forth around the house. Canine tracks specifically. Big ones. As she began to notice more and more, there was a bunch of them. This was weird because Verla was not an animal person at all, and in fact she was actually allergic to most pets, including cats and dogs. She lived pretty remotely, so we thought it was strange. There were also no neighbors within miles of her, so there's no reason any dogs at all should have been around her property. But there were multiple tracks and multiple sets of these prints. That's when my wife discovered that several of the basement windows had been broken all around the house. Where the windows were broken, there were a lot of these big canine tracks walking off into this spot. We both looked at each other. Is some big dog breaking into my wife's dead grandmother's house? I don't remember if I said it, but it was dusk at this point, and so it was starting to get darker and darker. I don't know if it was the sheer abnormality of the situation that caused our skin to crawl, but I could have sworn in that moment things around us got quiet. I began to feel really on edge, and I could tell my wife began to feel uncomfortable as well. I told her we'll just come back in the morning and look a little further. Up to this point, we had only done a quick walkthrough of the house. We didn't thoroughly search or anything. This will make sense in a second. So, we'd go back that night and would come back the following morning. Things seemed fairly normal. There's no noise from the woods, and all seems alive and well. Well, no weird noises, but we heard nature, of course. We looked onto the house and decided to search a little more thoroughly. If we were going to sell this thing, we wanted to make sure there wasn't anything out of place or anything cosmetically that we needed to fix. From the previous day, the broken windows in the basement could prove to be a problem, so we wanted to get down there and see what we could do to fix them. The great thing is that if we were to sell this place, we can really make a lot of money because it was such a beautiful piece of land. Thank you, Lord, that Verla did such an amazing job at keeping up on her house. We headed on down to the kitchen and into the basement, into a very massive basement, mind you. As soon as we opened the door, we're hit in the face with this stench of wet dog and urine. It's so thick it almost knocked us back on our feet. I remember my wife saying, "Oh God," as she's covering her face with her arm and walking down the stairs. Because it was an older house, the light to the basement was at the very bottom, so she just used her phone light to navigate down the stairs. I had followed closely behind her. Once we got to the bottom and turned the light on, we could see that the basement actually had a lot of room. There's the main basement room that we were in, and off to our left was a small room that looks like it could have been a wine cellar at some point. It had no windows in there. Off to our right was another small little hallway area that had a washer and dryer, and beyond that another room. The window in the room we were currently in was smashed inward, like something broken in. We didn't see any traces of hair or anything that would lead to somebody breaking in, but the stench of wet dog and urine was really bad. My wife and I chalked it up to some animal, probably a dog breaking in here and sleeping down here, even though it didn't add up at all with the tracks outside. It felt odd to even think about that because dogs don't act like that, nor do they behave in such a bizarre manner. The other weird thing was the basement windows were larger, but they were still about a 7-foot drop from the window to the ground. So how is the dog, if that's what it was, getting in and out of the basement? To our knowledge, nobody had been over at this house since she had died, which was about 5 weeks prior. This had to have been recent. We searched the other room with the window to see if there's anything we could find, and it was just more broken glass and that horrible, horrible stench. It gets even more weird though. After leaving the basement and spending more time looking throughout the house, I noticed that there was salt along every doorway upstairs and sage in every bedroom. I didn't really notice this before because I didn't take the time to pay attention, but it immediately struck me as weird. I'm no expert, but aren't lining doorways with salt and burning sage a way to ward off evil spirits? From what we knew, Verla was a hardcore atheist and thought everything of the spiritual manner was childish and make-believe. Why would she have this in her house? Plus the tracks outside the house and the weird noises during the day before the woods getting quiet. It was just too weird, and so we decided to call it a day and maybe get a realtor involved in helping us sell the place. I remember when we left, or I should say as we were leaving the house, I remember feeling very uncomfortable. On the drive back to the hotel, I was asking my wife if maybe Verla knew if there was the possibility of a poltergeist being in the house. But that doesn't explain the basement windows being busted inwards, like something had broken in and was living down there. Maybe they were two separate problems. I don't know, but it was weird. She agreed that the house kind of gave her weird vibes too, and not the good kind. The following day, we called up a local realtor and explained our situation, and she happily agreed to help us sell the house. We wanted her to go check out the place and get her opinion, so we scheduled the following day for her to come out with us and check the house out. We were supposed to be at the house that morning by 11 a.m., and we ended up getting stuck in traffic by about 20 minutes or so. So we're on our way there. I think it was around 11:15, and we get a phone call from the realtor. She sounded panicked and said we're going to have to find somebody else to help sell the house. She told us and asked us if we're aware that a big black dog was running around outside the house and ran after her to attack her. It scared her so bad. My wife and I were both thoroughly confused at what she was saying, but she was frantic and ended the call. Luckily, my wife's sister's husband was an investor and dealt with rental properties more than anything else. We got in touch with him and asked if he would be interested in helping us sell the house and splitting the profit, since my wife owned it now. He happily agreed and flew out to meet us. We had lunch, talked about the house and how much we were planning on selling it for. He offered to go check out the place and give us a good appraisal on the property. We trusted his judgment well since he knew the real estate game pretty thoroughly. We also informed them that a realtor that we just tried to work with was spooked off the property by some dog or so we warned him of that. He chuckled and went on his way. Well, we get a phone call from him about 3 hours after lunch, and the only thing he told us was that he's not helping us sell the house, that we're on our own. My wife and I are furious at this point and demand answers, but he refused to answer any questions and just said he's never going anywhere near that house again and that we need to stay away from it too. Exhausted, frustrated, and confused, we had no idea what the hell to do. The whole house selling process was very confusing and we were very new to it. We needed help, but everybody seemed to keep giving up on us, so my wife just decided to hold on to the house for a little bit longer and determine later on how we're going to sell the damn thing. My wife still is holding on to that property, and we've gone back a couple of times with some crazy things happening to us. Although, because there's so many things that happened, I'm not going to write it all out in one email, so I may send you more of that later. But for now, this is the gist of our situation with this house. We can't get rid of it, and there's some sort of crazy things going on with that property.